So for this week's watercolour tutorial, I thought I'd do a super simple stag silhouette. The photo for this again comes from the incredibly talented Rosie Dutton. I will leave her description in the description. I will leave her details in the description box below. The photos of this lovely stag seen at first light, so it's still quite dark, and I thought it would make a perfect, really simple, hopefully simple tutorial on how to paint a silhouette. I have drawn out the stag, and what I'm doing now is just wetting all of the background with one of the biggest watercolour brushes I own. I should probably invest in a larger one. But I'm just covering the whole background, and then we're going to do the background mainly wet in wet and just throw in a bunch of colours in there and see what happens. So I'll list the colours used in the description box as normal, but it's only going to be a few colours for this. The main one's going to be Payne's Grey, and I'm going to mix in some sap green, some mauve and some Van Dyke brown, and that is about it. If you wanted to, with something like this, you could just use Payne's Grey or another black colour. You could mix your own black if you wanted to with a blue and a brown. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna work quite well for that. And just do it in one colour. Start out with a really light wash and then get darker as you add each successive layer. I'm going to add in a few colours, and you can see I'm starting out with some mauve mixed in with my Payne's Grey. This is a really light wash to do the sky, and I'm dragging it all the way down to the bottom of the page. I'm covering the stag because the stag's going to be just Payne's Grey, which will sit on top of this colour quite nicely, so I'm not too worried about getting this colour through the stag. That doesn't really matter. And I'm dragging that sky colour all the way down, and then I'm going to add in some extra colours on top of that. I've mixed some sap green and Payne's Grey, and I'm adding that to the left of the stag to create some tree shapes in the background. Try and be really loose with this and don't draw individual branches. Because it's wet in wet, it's all going to blend out, so it should leave a nice soft edge. I'm doing a bit of a fir tree in the background there, but you can see I'm not putting a lot of effort into it, just really loose, easy, quick brush strokes. And then when we move to the right hand side of the stag, as well as this sap green, Payne's Grey mixture, I'm going to start introducing some Van Dyke brown. And that's going to form the colours on the right. And this is where you can use your own colours. It doesn't have to be sap green, doesn't have to be a brown. I'm just making an adjustment so that there is a difference in the colour, and that way it's going to be a bit more interesting than having the same block of colour all the way across the back. So here I'm just dabbing the top of the trees with a paper towel just to lighten them and soften them a little bit, because I want the trees to be lighter at the top and darker at the bottom. And I'm going to add a darker mixture of that Van Dyke brown and Payne's Grey to the bottom of the trees and drag up a few branches in the background too. Now I'm going to add a thick layer of Payne's Grey across the bottom right in the foreground, and I'm going to add a few little splats to the right hand side of the painting, which will indicate trees and bushes in the foreground. I'm not going to do that splatter effect all the way across because I want those distant trees to not have as much detail in them, and then I'm going to let it dry and come back to it in a moment. So here it is all dry, and I'm pretty happy with how that first layer's dried. I'm just using a paper towel here to soften the top edges of those trees because I still think they're a little bit too dark. I'm just softening any hard edges and trying to lighten them up a little bit so there's a bigger contrast. So I'm using a spray bottle now just to spray along the bottom half of the painting where I'm going to darken up the underneath of these trees a little bit. I still want to work wet in wet, so if you don't have a spray bottle you can just reapply some clean water to the bottom of your page just with your paintbrush as you would do normally, but make sure that your painting underneath has dried completely before you do that so you don't get muddy colours. And now it's a little bit of a repeat of what we did before. So sap green and Payne's grey on the left, more Van Dyke brown and Payne's grey on the right. I'm just darkening it up, really loose, quick brush strokes. And as I get beyond the area that I sprayed, I'm dragging the brush across sideways to get a little bit of texture and indicate some trees and some little twigs in the background as well. So I've let the painting dry again and now it's time to go over the stag. I'm using pure Payne's grey from this, straight from the pan, very little water so it's quite a thick mixture, and I'm using a fine detail brush to outline the antlers and then I'll outline the rest of the stag in the same way. Although I am outlining this in pure Payne's grey, so it doesn't really matter that there's colours in the background, one of the downsides of the colours in the background was they kind of covered up the pencil work, so it was more difficult to see exactly where the outline of the stag was. So an alternative to this method would be using masking fluid to begin with, just to cover over your stag, and that way once you've done all your background you can remove your masking fluid and you've got a perfect outline then to fill in, and you're not trying to work out exactly where his antlers went in the first place, which is a little bit of what I am doing here, but I don't think it turned out too bad. Just using a larger brush now for the rest of the stag. So once I reached the bottom of the stag, I decided to use some water, some clean water, just to wet the legs and the underneath of the stag and add my Payne's grey to that mixture. I want the stag to feel like it's kind of dissolving into the background rather than just being a really harsh silhouette all the way around. So I thought with this way the Payne's grey might blend out a little bit into the background, and I'm going to add some finishing touches just to help with that effect a bit later on. So I keep making tweaks as I go along with Payne's grey just to work on the outline of the silhouette a little bit and try and get it a little more accurate in comparison to the reference photo. So I let that dry again, and now I'm using my spray bottle to re-wet the bottom half like I did before, and I'm going to add in some darker colours again around the bottom half of the deer, just so he is much more blended in with the background rather than sitting on top of it. I'm using that sap green mixture to the left, Van Dyke brown to the right, and here the stag is in the middle. I'm going to mix up the colour underneath his legs so he's much more blended into the background than he currently is right now. Finishing touches now, so I'm dragging out Van Dyke brown with my smaller fine detail brush just to add in a few more branch details, some more Payne's grey along the bottom, and then I am going to spray over the deer a couple of times just to help that paint keep moving and blend in with the background a little more, and we'll see what that looks like when it's dry. So the painting is dry now, and I just have to remove the masking tape, and then I am pretty much done. I really enjoyed painting this lovely stag silhouette. I thought it was a really nice simple exercise which didn't involve 100 colours, it didn't involve too much detail, but it still turned out pretty nice. I think there's some atmosphere in there, so I am happy with that. And you can try this lots of different ways. You can have different animals in the foreground. If you wanted to just do this in one block of colour and work on layering thicker paint over the top of more watered down layers, that would be a nice exercise as well. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how the sky turned out. So here the painting is all finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back next week with another tutorial.